Travel didn't just come back in 2025, it came back overloaded. Crowds returned, flights filled up, iconic places were packed. But something else changed too. The patience that once defined global travel is officially over. From airports to sacred sites, behavior that used to be ignored is now being fined, banned, or punished outright. Not because travelers suddenly became worse, but because tolerance finally ran out. A tourist climbing a sacred monument, a flight delayed over a viral stunt, a crowd pushing past a barrier for one perfect photo. These weren't isolated moments. Together, they revealed a pattern: how crowding, social media, and zero-tolerance enforcement reshaped travel in 2025. This video isn't about shaming tourists. It's about understanding why 2025 became the breaking point, and what the worst travel behavior of the year tells us about where travel is headed next. In 2025, one of the biggest drivers of bad travel behavior wasn't alcohol, ignorance, or entitlement. It was content made for social media. Travel experiences were no longer just lived. They were staged, filmed, and optimized for algorithms. Moments mattered less for where they happened, and more for how they performed online. As viral trends spread faster, the margin for error disappeared. Airports, city centers, and historic sites became backdrops for stunts, challenges, and perfect shots, often with little regard for safety, rules, or context. Across Europe, cities stopped waiting for behavior to correct itself. In Dubrovnik, Athens, and Cannes, authorities introduced instant fines for things long ignored: eating near monuments, walking through historic centers in beachwear, public drinking, even wearing damaging footwear at ancient sites. These weren't symbolic rules, they were on-the-spot penalties designed to stop behavior immediately, before it became the next viral clip. And in extreme cases, the consequences went far beyond annoyance. During eruptions at Mount Etna in early 2025, crowds chasing dramatic footage clogged narrow roads and blocked rescue vehicles, prompting Sicily's civil protection chief to warn that content-driven tourism had become dangerous and out of control. What made 2025 different wasn't just worse behavior. It was that systems under pressure finally stopped absorbing it. Warnings became fines, access became restrictions, and the patience that once defined global travel quietly disappeared. In 2025, one of the clearest signs that global patience was running out came from a different kind of bad behavior, the kind that crossed cultural lines. Not loud, not chaotic, but deeply disrespectful in places where meaning matters most. All year, tourists treated sacred and historic sites as if they were stage sets, places to pass through, touch, climb, or joke about, without understanding what they represent to the people who live there. At the Temple of Kukulkan, a German tourist climbed the ancient pyramid despite a long-standing ban. Security intervened, but the real reaction came from locals, who confronted him as he was escorted out. For them, this wasn't just a rule broken. It was a cultural insult to a site that still holds spiritual and historical meaning. In Italy, similar tensions played out again and again. Tourists jumped into the Trevi fountain. One man was even banned for life after repeatedly diving in. Meanwhile, travelers carved initials into the Colosseum or stole artifacts from Pompeii, treating fragments of ancient history like souvenirs. These weren't isolated moments. They reflected a growing disconnect. Visitors treating heritage as disposable, while locals saw identity being disrespected in real time. In 2025, authorities didn't just issue reminders. They rolled out lifetime bans, stricter enforcement, and expanded respect rules at sacred and historic sites. Because when meaning is ignored long enough, the welcome doesn't just fade, it hardens. By 2025, the pressure wasn't just on cities or sacred traditions, it was on the world's most fragile places. Museums and monuments were never designed for millions of hands, flashes, and bodies. And this year, that reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't the loud chaos of airports or open cultural disrespect. It was quieter, but just as damaging. All it took was one photo too far and one crowd too many. In Park Güell, the strain was visible. Tourists climbed mosaics, leaned against delicate structures, and packed into narrow viewpoints for photos. After repeated damage, the city tightened access, adding barriers, expanding restricted zones, and increasing controls to protect artwork never meant to be touched at scale. At the Louvre, the problem wasn't vandalism, it was volume. Crowds around the Mona Lisa became so dense that the museum cut capacity and redesigned visitor flow to protect visitors as well as the art itself. And by December, the pressure snapped. Staff went on strike, saying overcrowding and understaffing made the museum impossible to protect. Across Europe and beyond, the message was the same. These places weren't failing. They were being worn down. Not by malice, but by pressure. So in 2025, museums and monuments didn't just update rules. They reinforced barriers, narrowed access, and accepted a hard truth. When everyone wants the same photo, something eventually gives. And this year, these places stopped pretending they could absorb it forever. France, Spain, and Italy all broke tourism records in 2025. But for the people who live there, that wasn't a victory. It was the moment tolerance ran out. In Amsterdam, that tension finally turned legal. In late September 2025, residents filed a lawsuit against the city for failing to enforce its own tourism cap, a limit on overnight stays that had been exceeded year after year. Housing pressure, noise, and overcrowding were no longer abstract complaints. They were documented realities, now part of a courtroom fight over who the city was actually for. In Barcelona and Mallorca, frustration spilled into the streets. Thousands marched demanding limits on short-term rentals and cruise arrivals. Protesters blocked tour buses, shut down plazas, and even sprayed water guns at passing crowds, a blunt signal that the city was full and locals were being pushed out. As one Barcelona resident put it, "It's not seasonal anymore, it's 365 days a year." In 2025, tourists didn't just witness these protests. They became part of them. Travel plans were disrupted, routes were blocked, and the atmosphere in once welcoming cities shifted from tolerance to tension. Even in places like Lisbon and Venice, the message was consistent. Locals weren't angry at visitors themselves. They were angry at systems that had turned their homes into theme parks. By the end of the year, Europe wasn't debating overtourism anymore. It was fighting it, in the streets, in city halls, and in courtrooms. By the summer of 2025, the stress that had been building in airports finally spilled into the air. Airports were overwhelmed, with packed flights and cascading delays pushing crews and passengers past their limits. People weren't acting worse because they suddenly became worse. They were acting worse because the experience did. And as the pressure rose, the incidents followed. A Breeze Airways flight diverted after a restrained passenger broke free mid-air. A SkyWest flight landed early after someone tried to open a cabin door. These weren't isolated meltdowns. They were symptoms of a system pushed past capacity. By late 2025, U.S. authorities had logged more than 1,500 unruly passenger cases, turning air rage from an annoyance into a genuine safety concern. Governments escalated as well. France introduced new rules allowing fines of up to 20,000 euros and flight bans lasting as long as 4 years for serious repeat offenders, a clear signal that air rage was no longer being tolerated at any level. And ordinary travelers paid the price, stuck on runways, rebooked days later, or watching confrontations unfold a few rows away. Flying was never predictable, but in 2025 it became volatile. A pressure cooker where one delay, one argument, or one bad decision could turn an entire flight into a breaking point. Some of the most surprising travel breakdowns in 2025 didn't happen in cities or airports. They happened in nature. And the damage wasn't loud. It was small, quiet, and often unintentional. Across beaches and national parks, wildlife became collateral in the chase for the perfect experience. Rangers reported the same pattern again and again. Visitors stepping into nesting zones, crowding animals for selfies, or treating fragile habitats like open sets. The animals weren't the threat. The attention was. The consequences often came later, at the airport. Customs officers began seizing souvenirs travelers thought were harmless: a piece of coral, a jar of sand, a polished shell bought at a beach market. What felt like a keepsake to the traveler was protected material to the country, and the fines reflected it. And enforcement got tougher too. More than 100 countries launched coordinated wildlife protection crackdowns, meaning even ordinary travelers faced stricter checks and surprise seizures at airports. Families were stopped over sand. Couples were detained over trinkets made from endangered species. Vacations ended in inspection rooms, not photo albums. In a year defined by pressure, even nature needed protection. And crossing the line didn't take much. Sometimes just one shell, one stone, or one step too close. For years, travel came with an unspoken assumption. Mistakes would be forgiven. Tourists would be warned, redirected, or quietly cleaned up after. The system absorbed the damage. 2025 was the year that stopped working. None of the stories in this video were really about villains. They were about volume. Too many people. Too much pressure. Too little patience left to give. Cities stopped tolerating disruption. Sacred spaces stopped accepting excuses. Airlines stopped negotiating. Nature stopped being resilient. And travelers discovered something new. Access was no longer guaranteed. The worst-behaved travelers of 2025 weren't always loud or malicious. They were the ones who assumed the rules didn't apply. That the welcome was automatic. That money, curiosity, or ignorance would smooth everything over. It didn't. Travel didn't end in 2025. But immunity did. The freedom to move without consequence. The expectation of endless tolerance. The idea that being a visitor meant being exempt. Going forward, travel comes with conditions. Respect matters. Awareness matters. Behavior matters. So the question isn't whether people should travel less. It's whether they're ready to travel differently. Because the world didn't close its doors. It just stopped leaving them unlocked. Thanks for watching. If you want reporting that cuts through the noise and actually prepares you for what's changing in global travel, consider subscribing. The next year is going to be even more unpredictable, and being informed may be the only real advantage travelers have left.